Hello and welcome back. My name's Emily and today we're going to talk about some books that are near and dear to my heart, books that I consider to be some of my favorites, books that I would literally sell my soul to read for the first time again. We have 7 books to discuss, maybe 8 because I might not have one of them, so let's just get right into it. Starting out with the most recent, How to Lose the Time War. This book, as I was like halfway through, I was thinking, I always am hesitant to answer the question of what's my favorite book. It's such a difficult question for me to answer. But reading this book, I was like, I think that this is my answer because this book was absolutely stunning and perfect. How to Lose the Time War follows 2 agents on opposite sides of a war, but the war isn't just a regular war, it's a time war. So this book is very science fiction, very abstract, and just very poetic and beautiful. The 2 agents begin to correspond with each other, and we see their little rivalry as 2 of the best agents go from being a rivalry and kind of taunting to becoming more romantic, and they become more involved. And because it's very abstract and science fiction and plays with time, the authors are so creative in the ways that they write their letters. So these people are writing letters to each other in the bark of a tree that then grows for hundreds of years, and then the other one goes and chops it down and then travels back up a thread of time. So it's just this very interesting book. We don't get a lot of world building right up front. It is a really short book. We learn as we go through the book what is going on, and there's still questions that were left unanswered as far as the way that the world works and traveling through time works, but I didn't feel like I was missing any information because of this. It just made it feel so much more whimsical and abstract and interesting. At first I was like, I have no idea what's going on, but it's gorgeous, amazing, stunning writing. And then as I got to know more what was going on and as the romance developed, I was like, oh my gosh, my heart is like, this book was holding my heart in its hand, and it was amazing. And I would definitely recommend this if you love romance, science fiction, and more abstract concepts, not so much literal and plot focused. Next we have The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath, which is a classic, and it's a story of a 19-year-old girl struggling with depression. She goes through an internship, and we're just really in this brain of this girl as she struggles and kind of devolves into a worse and worse mental state throughout the book. The back of the book sums this up really well. It says, Sylvia Plath masterfully draws the reader into Esther's breakdown with such intensity that Esther's insanity becomes completely real and even rational, as probable and accessible an experience as going to the movies. Such deep penetration into the dark and harrowing corners of the psyche is an extraordinary accomplishment and has made The Bell Jar a haunting American classic. That sums it up better than I ever could. It's just the most perfect examination of the inside of someone's brain, and a lot of that is because Sylvia Plath drew on inspiration from her own mental illness for this book, so it feels very close to the chest. This book was really well paced. It was extremely easy to read. I know classics can sometimes be intimidating, but this one truly wasn't. Something pivotal felt like it was happening in each chapter, so I was never bored with the book, and it was told from a first-person point of view, and that made it so much more personal and close, and you really just feel like you're in Esther's shoes. I would definitely read this with caution if you are in a precarious mental state. Definitely this is a book to read when you are feeling so mentally stable because it does start to feel very real. The next book on my list is Dark Matter by Blake Crouch, and Dark Matter is truly a genre-defying book. The book follows a physicist who is kidnapped and experiences a parallel version of his life had he made some different choices. And it's a sci-fi book, it's a romance book, it's a thriller. It's really trippy and it has really good, pretty writing. I felt like this book was like so well written that I would genuinely read anything that Blake Crouch wrote, even a grocery list on a scrap of paper. It was so good, so fast paced. I was reading it with reading it as a buddy read, and I got to a point and I was like, I can't wait, like I have to keep going. And the book just literally, I flew through it. I think if you are unsure about reading or what you want, this would be a great book to start with because it's just so incredible and covers so many different genres that it definitely has something for everyone. I was literally on the edge of my seat, devoured Dark Matter. I would recommend it to pretty much anyone. The next book on my list is Circe by Madeline Miller, which I think I've talked about in like 4 videos or something insane because this book lives rent-free in my head. Madeline Miller is a unparalleled writer. She is so good. The Song of Achilles was of the same caliber as Circe. Definitely both of them are must reads. Circe follows Circe. It's a Greek mythology retelling from the woman's perspective, which we don't get a lot of in Greek mythology. A lot of it is from the man's point of view, so it feels like this is a story that needs to be told. Circe is a sorceress. She's the daughter of the sun god Helios, and she gets exiled to an island to live out her days in isolation, and she's most known for being the island that Odysseus visited in the Odyssey, where he and his sailors are turned into pigs, or maybe it's just his sailors, but she turns men into animals. And instead of seeing her story through Odysseus's eyes, we see all of these characters come to her island. We see her get exiled to her island and slowly over so long, because she's an immortal, learn sorcery and witchcraft and magic, and learn about love and motherhood and all of the beautiful poetic things that exist in, like, I would say a good literary fiction book. All of those themes that literary fiction books are so good at exploring are explored in this book, but it's a fantasy book, so it just has another element that made me love it so much. So it has truly everything that you could want in a book except a fast-paced plot, I would say. This book was so good that it felt real. It was heartbreaking. It was empowering. I really liked the way that Circe talked about immortality and the gods, because I feel like a lot of times when we read stories, or at least when I read stories about vampires that live forever, I'm like, oh my gosh, I wish I could live forever. That sounds sick. And the way that she talked about it made it feel more realistic and less desirable, which I thought was a good spin on immortality, because we get so many fantasy books that kind of romanticize it a lot, and this one didn't. It felt more realistic. So I thought that was just a good little element sprinkled in there. This book, though, so good. And it's like island vibes and witchy vibes, which what more could you want? Next we have Ninth House, which is part dark academia, part mystery, part fantasy. Masterpiece of a novel that follows Alex, who can see ghosts, which are called greys, and she gets scouted to go to Yale and work in a organization that kind of keeps secret societies that are performing magic in check. So we follow Alex's story, and this is told in a non-linear way, so we have like a then now kind of setting where it's back and forth. We put the pieces together as we go, which I really like in a book, like a very non-linear way of like the piecemeal, is that the right word, type of storytelling, where we get like just parts of the past and parts of the present, and we're a little bit unsure of what's going on, and then everything wraps up together. I think that that's just always feels satisfying when it wraps up, and this book, another one that just has it all. The characters, the writing style, the pacing, all were just stunning. The characters felt very personable and their relationships felt very realistic. We had a lot of morally gray characters, which I love so much. You root for them and you love them, but they're not these perfect, can do no wrong characters. The subject matter was interesting because it's like secret societies, almost like a better version of the Da Vinci Code, but not really. It's like if that wasn't even true. I'm so sorry. I made a whole other video about it though, so I'll put that linked and you can watch it if you want to hear more about why I love Ninth House and the sequel to it, Hellbent, so freaking much. Next we have Daisy Jones and the Six, and honestly anything that's like the historical fiction Taylor Jenkins Reid era are all 5-star books for me. I think that Taylor Jenkins Reid just is putting something in her books that I don't know what it is, but it's so addictive. And I think it has to do with how heartbreaking and realistic the characters feel, and the worlds that she builds and how they're set in these glamorous like 1970s. Let me start the plot. If you haven't seen the show or read this book follows a 1970s band and their rise to fame. So we get it told to us through an interview format, which I think is really interesting, turns people off of the book at first. This book is literally like, oh my gosh, it's a vibe. If you've seen the show, I feel like the show did a great job portraying the vibe of the book. I know that it missed some of the details, but I would definitely recommend reading this book and watching the show because the vibes were just amazing, especially if you love live music. And I think that one thing that makes Taylor Jenkins Reid books so special is that while they're about one thing on the surface, like many good literary fiction books, they are about so much more underneath that topic. So this book on the surface is about a rock band and their rise to fame, but underneath the surface, it's about heartbreak and drug abuse and love and sacrifice and all of these other really great themes. It's just so perfect. And I need everyone to read Taylor Jenkins Reid books. I feel like she deserves all of the hype that she gets. They're incredible. This book ripped my heart out, broke it, and then put it back together. The next book on the list of books that I would sell my soul to read for the first time again is Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov. This book is about a horrible excuse of a man who kidnaps a 12-year-old girl and is convinced that he is in love with her. This book, I feel, gets marketed as a romance book, and it is not a romance book in subject matter. The thing that makes this book so incredible and makes people want to read about it is how beautifully it's written. This book has some of the most gorgeous writing I have ever read in my entire life by far, and it is truly the epitome of unreliable narrator, where you are reading this and you are inside the head of this man who is convinced he is in love with this child. So you get that unreliable narrator and you're disgusted, but you're also very intrigued by the writing, or at least that's how my journey with this book was. Blown away by how beautiful the writing was, but shocked, because when I picked this book up, I thought that it was going to be romantic. And I quickly realized, like anyone with any degree of media comprehension skills would realize, it's not a love story. So do not get it twisted. This book is deeply disturbing, but fantastically written. I think that it is a little bit problematic because Vladimir Nabokov took inspiration from a true story and didn't really give it credit. And I don't think that that's fair to the victim of that story. I think that when you separate the art from the artist, which I know some people don't like to do, this is still just an amazing book. If you loved Lolita, or if you're interested in it, there's another book and it's called The Real Lolita, and it's about the case that the inspiration from this book was drawn from. I'll put a picture of it here, but if you've read this and really liked it, definitely The Real Lolita is worth a read. I feel like this book just is extremely discussion provoking. Would love to hear people's thoughts about it, but I would love to read it for the first time again. It's been a while. I need to reread it still, but it was just an amazingly written book. Very, very sad. Read with caution, read trigger warnings. Another problematic book to end it off, American Psycho by Bret, Easton, Ellis. I had seen this book referenced in so many just like TikToks. People would talk about Patrick Bateman. I had to know what was going on, and I hadn't seen the movie, and I just thought, what a great opportunity to pick up this book before seeing the movie. Honestly, look up trigger warnings for this book. It's like everything. It's disgusting. It's disturbing. This is the most insane, horribly graphic book that I've ever read in my life. And if you're unfamiliar, this is the first person point of view of narcissist and alleged potential serial killer Patrick Bateman, investment banker who kills people. While this was disgusting, and I don't actually know if I would ever go back and reread it, I was very intrigued when I was reading it because I felt like it was a very culturally relevant depiction of OCD, mental illness, over-consumerism, capitalism, vanity, narcissism. Like, it just was so interesting, and it's interesting that it's withstood the test of time. The inner monologues were insane, and I think what saved me from getting bored with this book in the inner monologues was when he was really just going on and on, Patrick, about something like that there would be 5 pages about just his one song on his playlist. And those chapters, I just allowed myself to read really fast and skim instead of trying to focus on every single word when he was just kind of going on and on and on and on, because I feel like that's what it would have sounded like in his head, just kind of like not staying too long on a thought versus like reading it really carefully. And then there were parts where I was like reading it more slowly and carefully and digesting it, but that's like just a tip for reading this book if you do want to pick it up. After I read this, I watched the movie, and I thought that the movie was absolutely incredibly done. I am so glad that I think a woman directed the movie. Okay, Mary Harron. I don't really know anything about movies. I don't know anything about that woman, but I feel like sometimes when I read a book and then watch a movie, actually most times, it is extremely disappointing, and a lot of the times it feels to me like the director, whoever wrote the movie, did not read the book, and I feel like the person who wrote the movie definitely read and really understood this book and did a great job, because it is satire in a lot of ways, and the movie really showed that. And it's really hard to make a movie, I feel, about like on a book that contains so much inner monologue, and the movie nailed it. Honestly, if you like the movie, I feel like you would like the book. It was really good. It was really well written too, and I did not want to put it down. It was interesting at the beginning too, because it started out so slow and we get just so much of his friends, and then the characters were kind of confusing. Like the friends were hard to keep track of, which I feel like was done purposefully, because it's like, I don't know, there were just so many great things to analyze in this book. And this is like a perfect Halloween read if you are not weak-stomached, because the way that he would describe his crimes was vile and disgusting, and I could not believe that it had been like a published book. Really ended off there with two absolutely chaotic books, but would love to hear y'all's thoughts if you've read any of these books, and if you liked or disliked them, because they are some books that I would absolutely love to read for the first time again. If you haven't read them, I'm so jealous of you, because you have this golden opportunity now to read them for the first time again, and I think you should take it and report back to me. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day. I really appreciate each and every one of you, and I really appreciate 500 subscribers. So cool, so fun to just talk about books with you all. So thank you. Bye.